Good afternoon, students. And so we are now in week 6. We are halfway done with this class. Congratulations for making it this far. And so in this video, I'm going to go, for this Zoom lecture, I'm going to go over the week 7 quiz. So your week 7 quiz is going to be your very last quiz that you're going to take for the spring semester class. And I want to wish everyone a happy Memorial Day in advance. And I want to wish everyone, I know it's in a couple of weeks. I can't believe it's almost summer. So without further ado, I'm going to start my week 7 quiz lecture. So this week, we're going to talk about week 7 quiz. We're going to talk about sentence structure. And so here, sentence structure. Sentences can be joined together by either a coordinating conjunction, subordinating conjunction, or a transition word. All of the following sentences are joined together by different conjunctions. If the conjunction is a subordinating conjunction, then the sentence becomes a dependent clause and you need another sentence to complete the thought. These are known as complex sentences. If the sentences are joined by coordinating conjunctions, then you have a compound sentence. You need to learn the difference between a subordinating and a coordinating conjunction, as well as to know different sentence structures in order to avoid sentence fragments. In student essays, I'm always commenting, learn sentence structure in order to avoid sentence fragments. And I have said that hundreds of times. So today, you will learn sentence structure so you can avoid sentence fragments. First, you need to recognize 3 basic sentence types in English. There are simple sentence, compound sentence, and complex sentence. And so here, when you have a simple sentence, the very first one, a simple sentence, John was fat, Mary was thin. Those are simple sentences. Then when you add in coordinating conjunctions like fanboys, for, and, but, or, nor, so, yet, then it becomes a compound sentence. So here you have John was fat, but Mary was thin. That's a compound sentence. And when you add in a subordinating conjunction, it becomes a complex sentence. Although John was fat, Mary was thin. Mary was thin even though John was fat. And so what is the difference between a coordinating and subordinating conjunction? When you have a coordinating conjunction, this means that the 2 sentences are of equal importance. John was fat, yet Mary was thin. And then if you have a subordinating conjunction, then you have one sentence that's less important than the other. So in this sentence, although John was fat, so that's the subordinate clause, so it's less important. And Mary was thin, that's the important clause. So in a complex sentence, you have one important sentence and one less important sentence. Whereas in a compound sentence, you have both sentences have the same equal significance. So here, let's go over English sentence structure. Simple sentence. A simple sentence is subject plus verb plus object. A simple sentence is a complete thought, also known as an independent clause. Jack gets good grades. Jack is the subject, gets is the verb, good is the adjective, grades is the object. Jack studies hard. So whenever you have a simple subject, it's subject, verb, and object. You have a simple sentence. Steve gambles all the time. Steve is the subject, gambles is the verb, and all the time is the preposition of time, adverb phrase of time. And then you can also have as your simple sentence, subject, Steve loses, verb, rarely, adverb, at the casinos, which is a prepositional phrase. And so a prepositional phrase always shows time and place, like at the table, on the table, under the table. Mary likes to dress up. So if you have subject, Mary, likes, verb, to dress up is an infinitive phrase. So that's subject, verb, object. Robert eats steak. So Robert is the subject, eats is the verb, steak is the object. So that's subject, verb, object. Up the hill sits an old house. That's also a simple sentence. Up the hill indicates time and place. So, and then sits is the verb, and then an old house is the subject. So that is a simple sentence where you have a prepositional phrase, a verb, and a subject. So remember, in this kind of construction, the subject is the last sentence, it's the last word. So up the hill sits an old house, has the same meaning as the old house sits up the hill. So the old house, subject, sits is verb, and prepositional phrase, up the hill. Down the street is the police station. So down the street is the prepositional phrase, is the verb, and the police station is the subject. It has the same meaning as the police station is down the street. Second kind of sentence is a compound sentence. In other words, two sentences joined by fanboys, for and nor, but, or, yet, so. A compound sentence has fanboys in it. Fanboys are coordinating conjunctions that join two sentences together. A coordinating conjunction joins two simple sentences together to form a compound sentence. John and Mary ate and slept. That's actually a simple sentence, even though you have and, because here John and Mary is a compound subject. Ate and slept are compound verbs. So that's just subject and verb. So that makes a simple sentence. But you only have one sentence here. When you have a compound sentence, you have two sentences joined together by a coordinating conjunction. Fanboys. Jack gets good grades. For, he studies hard. So for in this case means because. Jack is tall, but Mary is short. When you have a compound sentence, remember that you have to put a comma before the coordinating conjunction. So always put the comma before the coordinating conjunction. Steve gambles all the time, yet he rarely loses. Mary likes to dress up, so she can feel good about herself. Usually, Mr. Smith goes to the park, or he goes to the beach. So the quiz would be, I could tell the room had been dusted, for all the pictures were crooked. In this sentence, for means because. And so here you would have a comma before the coordinating conjunction. Fanboys always have to have a comma before the fanboys. So this is an example of a sentence from your quiz. A subordinating conjunction is a complex sentence. A complex sentence has a subordinating conjunction, which is a dependent clause plus an independent clause. And these words are all examples of subordinating conjunctions. And whenever you have a subordinating conjunction starting a sentence, that becomes a dependent clause, and it cannot stand alone, and it is a sentence fragment. So here are some complex sentences. After John eats dinner, always put a comma when the dependent clause comes at the beginning of the sentence. So after John eats dinner, comma, he goes to bed. Although Jack is fat, comma, he eats very little. As soon as the alarm clock rings, comma, Steve jumps out of bed. And so here you notice that Steve jumps out of bed is the independent clause. As soon as the alarm clock rings is the dependent clause. And when you put the dependent clause and the independent clause together as one sentence, that makes a complex sentence. As long as I study hard, I can get good grades. Because Michael Jordan is tall, he plays great basketball. Before I go to bed, comma, I brush my teeth. If I avoid sick people, I can catch fewer colds. Once I get my driver's license, comma, I will buy my own car. Rather than spend a lot of money on clothes, I like to make my own clothes. Since I lost my husband, I have to get a job. So you have the dependent clause and the independent clause. I have to get a job. If the subordinate clause, dependent clause, is at the end of the sentence, you don't need a comma. John goes to bed after he eats dinner. He eats very little, although he is fat. So you'll notice in all of these, the dependent clause comes at the end of the sentence and no comma is used. So he eats very little, although he is fat. Steve jumps out of bed as soon as the alarm clock rings. I can get good grades as long as I study hard. Michael Jordan plays great basketball because he is tall. I brush my teeth before I go to bed. I can catch fewer colds if I avoid sick people. Michael Jordan plays great basketball because he is tall. So all of these sentences are complex sentences. But if you just have the dependent clause by itself, then it's a sentence fragment. So a sentence fragment means it's an incomplete thought, not a complete sentence. So after John eats dinner, that is a dependent clause, and it is not a complete sentence. The complete sentence would be, after John eats dinner, comma, he goes to bed. That becomes, so a complex sentence is when you have a dependent clause and an independent clause together as one sentence. Now so I just finished telling you that the rule was that if the dependent clause is at the beginning of the sentence, you have a comma, but if the dependent clause is at the end of the sentence, you have no comma. But the exception to that rule is when you have adjective clauses with whom, whose, which, that. So if the dependent clause comes at the end of the sentence and you have who, whom, whose, which, that, then you need a comma. So here, when you have who, whom, whose, which, that, I love the table, comma, that is made of wood. The reason why you have a comma is because this is also known as an adjective clause. This entire clause modifies table. So what kind of table is it? It's a table that's made out of wood. Therefore, this entire clause modifies table. So you need a comma. That's the reason why. For adjective clauses, you need to have a comma. So when the adjective clause is at the end of the sentence, you have one comma. But if the adjective clause is at the beginning of the sentence, you need two commas. So John, who is French, lives in Paris. And so when you have who, whose, which, that, you have to have two commas. So you put the comma before the dependent clause, and you put the comma after the dependent clause. So you need two of them. And here, this adjective clause modifies John. Who is John? John is French. And so we always use a relative clause if we have two sentences with the same subject. John is French. John lives in Paris. So that sounds choppy in your essay. So in order to make your essay flow better, we would combine the two sentences with who. So John, who is French, lives in Paris. So that's why we have adjective clauses to combine sentences with the same subject together so that you have sentence variety in your essay. So to repeat, you have three kinds of sentences in English. You have a simple sentence, which is subject, verb, object. John, subject, eats, verb, dinner, object. You have the compound sentence, where you have fanboys, where you have two different sentences joined together by a coordinating conjunction. Fanboys, for, and, but, or, nor, so, yet. So John likes to walk outside, semicolon. Therefore, comma, he is fit. And so when you have, and also when you have a transition word, you have to remember to use a semicolon and a comma. And all of this is still a compound sentence. So you should all get yourself, Google yourself a list of transition words so that you can combine your paragraphs and your sentences together for better flow. I'm going to go over in more detail transition words in my week 8 lecture. And then, so you have three kinds of sentence: simple sentence, compound sentence, complex sentence. Simple sentence, subject, verb, object. Compound sentence, you have an independent clause, coordinating conjunction with fanboys, and a independent clause. When you have a complex sentence, you have a dependent clause followed by an independent clause. That becomes, and two together makes up one sentence. You cannot have a dependent clause by itself because it becomes a sentence fragment. So here are some examples from your quizzes. The reason why this is bolded in blue is because these are the exact examples from your quiz. So if you aren't going to make it, please call. That is a complete thought. It is a correct sentence. Why? Because if you aren't going to make it, that's a dependent clause. That please call, that is an independent clause. So when you have an independent clause together with when you have two different sentences together and it's combined with dependent and independent clause, it becomes a complex sentence. So that is correct. It takes skill to call in sick to work with a phony excuse. This is also a correct sentence. It's a simple sentence. And so here you have it is the subject, takes skill to call in sick to work with a phony excuse. So takes skill, takes is the verb. Skill to call in all of this becomes the predicate, okay, the object predicate. So here you have subject, it, takes is the verb, and then skill is the object. So subject, verb, object makes this a simple sentence. So this is a complete correct sentence. First of all, one must be sure to speak directly to the boss. This is a complete sentence. First of all is a introductory phrase. And then after an introductory phrase, you always use a comma. Then one is the subject, must be sure to speak is the helping verb, and a verb directly to the boss would be adverb and prepositional phrase. So subject, verb, prepositional phrase, that's a simple sentence. Today I will be making appointments on the phone. This is a correct sentence. So you have I as the subject, will be making appointments is will be verb, appointments on the phone is object. So here you have subject, verb, object. So today I will be making appointments on the phone is correct sentence. This one is not correct. When I was 4, my father, oh, actually this is correct, sorry. When I was 4, my father taught me how to ride a bike. So when I was 4 is a complex, is a dependent clause. And my father taught me how to ride a bike is an independent clause. So when you put a dependent and independent clause together, it becomes a complex sentence. At the age of 4, my father taught me to ride a bike. And so at the age of 4 is incorrect because at the age of 4 is a prepositional phrase, and then it's missing a subject. So here you say, was your father 4 years old when he taught you how to ride a bike? No. So the correct sentence, at the age of 4, I learned how to ride a bike. And so this one is incorrect, and this one is correct. I could tell the room had been dusted, for all the pictures were crooked. So this is a correct sentence because I could tell the room had been dusted is a independent clause. Then you have a comma, and you have a fanboys, and then you have all the pictures were crooked. So this is a compound sentence. So whenever you have an independent clause plus a coordinating conjunction and then an independent clause, then you have a complete sentence. So that is a correct sentence. So what are modifiers? Modifiers describe the subject objects of the sentence. Modifiers are words that provide details and description about the object. And so you need to know this because on the quiz, they're going to say true or false. Do modifiers provide details and description about the object? Yes. An example of a modifier is like your adjective. So here you have a modifier, blue, and it describes the object, shirt. And so when we modify something, an example of modifiers are adjectives. So whenever you describe the subject, red house, blue shirt, wooden table, boring teacher. And so boring is the modifier that modifies the noun teacher. Although I don't count myself as boring. So there are two kinds of modifiers. You have, and they're all errors that people make in their essays. You have a dangling modifier. A dangling modifier occurs when a modifier does not logically refer to other words in the sentence. In other words, here you have visiting the zoo. the birds chirped loudly. So the birds grew feet, drove their car, and went to a zoo. So obviously the birds are not visiting the zoo. So this sentence is not correct because it's missing a subject. Okay, so it should be, while I was visiting the zoo, the birds chirped loudly. So that is a dangling modifier mistake because you have a modifier, but no noun of what it's modifying. What is it modifying? And therefore you leave the modifier dangling because you're missing something. So that's known as a dangling modifier error. Here are some more examples of dangling modifiers. Walking on the sidewalk, a car raced by. So your car grew legs and walked on a sidewalk? No. So therefore it should be, while I was walking on the sidewalk, a car raced by. That's the correct sentence. So walking on the sidewalk, a car raced by is a dangling modifier mistake. While working, an earthquake shook the building. And so the earthquake got a job and is working in a building? No. So here it should be, while I was working, an earthquake shook the building. And so you're missing the subject I, or while she was working, or while Tom was working. It could be any subject. Okay, while we were working, an earthquake shook the building. And so that is also a dangling modifier because it's missing a subject. Having finished the assignment, the TV was turned on. And so the TV grew hands and did the assignment? No, it should be after I finished my assignment, I turned the TV on. And so this one is missing who turned on the TV and who did the assignment. So that is also a dangling modifier mistake. Having arrived late, a written excuse was needed. Once again, the piece of paper, the written excuse grew arms and arrived late somewhere? No, so it should be having arrived late, I needed a written excuse, or I gave a written excuse to my to my boss. And so that's also a dangling modifier mistake. And so here, so all of these sentences, here's another dangling modifier mistake. At the age of 4, my dad taught me to ride a bike. And at the age of 4, that meant that when I was 4, my dad taught me to ride a bike. And so once again, this is also a dangling modifier mistake because it's missing the subject. Obviously, your father is not going to be 4 years old and it is, teaching you how to ride a bike. So it should be when I was 4 years old, my father taught me how to ride a bike. So these are all examples of dangling modifiers. And a dangling modifier occurs when a modifier does not logically refer to other words in the sentence because it's missing a subject. The next kind of modifier is known as a misplaced modifier error. That occurs when a modifier is placed incorrectly in the sentence. Then you have to move that modifier elsewhere in order to correct the sentence. So all the sentences below are misplaced modifiers. So pay attention to the colored sentences, but these are all examples of misplaced modifiers on your quiz. So it's incorrect to say the patient was referred to a therapist with severe problems. So you're going to take your patient to a doctor that also has problems? No. So this means that therapist is not the one with severe problems. So you have to move around the words with severe problems, with the patient with severe psychological problems was referred to a therapist. So you notice that I had to move these modifiers elsewhere next to the patient. That's known as a misplaced modifier because it's not placed in the correct place. Another example of a misplaced modifier, the new employee will take the front office wearing the brown suit. How do we fix this sentence? This is also a misplaced modifier mistake. Is the front office wearing a brown suit? No. So we would fix this sentence by saying the new employee wearing the brown suit will take the front office. So that is the correct sentence. My uncle just watches one television station. And so here, just has to be placed here. My uncle watches just one television station. And so here, if you got to move just to another area in order for this to make sense. So whenever you got to move the modifier someplace else for the sentence to make sense, that's called a misplaced modifier mistake. Here you say, here's another misplaced modifier mistake. I will be on the phone making appointments today. And it should be, I will be making appointments on the phone today, because your telephone cannot be making appointments. You are the one making appointments. So it should be, I will be making appointments on the phone today. So whenever you have to rearrange the sentence for it to make sense, that's known as a misplaced modifier mistake. On her way home, Jan found a gold man's watch. Men are not made of gold, so gold is in the wrong place. So you need to place this modifier over here. On her way home, Jan found a man's gold watch. So whenever you got to move the modifier to another spot on the sentence, then that means you have a misplaced modifier mistake. The torn student's book lay on the desk. So the student is not torn in pieces. It's the book that's torn. So you would have to say the student's torn book lay on the desk. So this is also a misplaced modifier mistake. So the key to correcting misplaced or dangling modifiers is make sure the doer of the action is named, and make sure the modifier is placed near the word it modifies. And so here, torn is supposed to be talking about the book, but it's far away. So that's why torn needs to be placed near the word it modifies, which is book. Sentence fragments. Sentence fragments are missing parts of the sentence, like a subject, verb, or complete thought. A sentence fragment is an incomplete thought. A sentence fragment does not express a complete thought. A dependent clause not attached to an independent clause is a sentence fragment. More examples of sentence fragments are, in a fragment, the subject or the predicate is missing. And so when you have something missing from your sentence, that's why it's called a fragment of a sentence, because it's only part of the sentence. So an example of a sentence fragment is broke the glass. Who broke the glass? So you're missing the subject. And then you have the dog broke the glass. That's correct, because then you have the subject, verb, and object. Sentence fragment, Mr. and Mrs. Smith. Mr. and Mrs. Smith did what? So you're missing the verb and the object. So if you say Mr. and Mrs. Smith are old people, that's correct. That becomes a correct sentence. So here are all the fragments that are on your quiz. Not to a coworker or secretary. That's a sentence fragment because it's missing a verb and an object. And not sound like a faker. That's a fragment as well because it's missing a verb and an object, and it's not a complete thought. When he is fat is a dependent clause, not a complete thought. If a person talks to a coworker who doesn't like him or her, this is a sentence fragment because it's missing the independent clause. Remember, when you have a complex sentence, you always have to have a dependent clause and then an independent clause, and then together it makes a complete sentence. Run-on sentences. A run-on sentence is two or more sentences written as one. A sentence can contain more than one thought as long as it is punctuated correctly. A run-on sentence occurs when ideas are joined together incorrectly. And so a comma splice is when you put two different sentences together and then you put instead of putting a period, usually we put a period after a sentence. But if we forget to put our period and we just run the sentences together, then you end up with run-on sentences. And you've got two kinds of run-on sentences. Comma splice, that's when you put in an unnecessary comma where you're supposed to put a period or a conjunction. And then you have a fused sentence also when you don't have, when you have no period after the sentence. So basically, when you don't properly punctuate between your sentences and you don't put periods between your sentences, you end up with a run-on sentence. So let's take an example of a comma splice. A comma splice is when you use a comma instead of a period at the end of a sentence. A comma splice occurs when two independent clauses are joined with a comma instead of a conjunction. So let's say I have John ate dinner, comma, he went to the restaurant. That's not right. So you can correct that by saying John ate dinner, comma, and he went to the restaurant. So if you want to use a comma, you have to put in fanboys. So you remember, when you have a compound sentence and you have fanboys, you always have to have a comma before fanboys. So John ate dinner, comma, and he went to the restaurant. So if you put in the conjunction and, that makes it a correct sentence. John ate dinner, period. He went to the restaurant. That's also correct. So if you put a period at the end of the sentence, that makes it correct. So either you can correct a comma splice by either putting a period or adding a coordinating conjunction. A fused sentence is when you have two sentences with no period after the first sentence. So that's the same thing, okay? John who ate dinner, you can fuse the two sentences together either by, if the two sentences have the same subject, you can use a relative clause. So you could say John ate dinner, he went to the restaurant. That's correct. Or you can say John who ate dinner went to the restaurant. Or you can say John who went to the restaurant ate dinner. You cannot say John ate dinner, he went to the restaurant. Here you have, this is a fused sentence because you have no comma. This is a comma splice because you have an unnecessary comma. So when you have a fused sentence, it means you have two sentences that run together with no comma, or with no period. And when you have a comma splice, you have unnecessary comma between two sentences where you're supposed to put a period or a comma and a conjunction. Here are some examples of comma splice examples in your quiz. The can of mushroom soup must have spoiled, comma, it was bulging at the top. So here you can fix this by either putting a period, and then you have to capitalize, it was bulging. So this is correct. Here you have an unnecessary comma. I respect my parents. I resent their attempts to choose a career for me. And so here you have, I respect my parents. Here is incorrect because this has an unnecessary comma. So this is a comma splice. It's a run-on sentence. The most popular language in the world is Chinese. More than 1 billion people speak it. So here you need a comma. Here you need a period, okay? And you could say the most popular language in the world is Chinese, period. Then you capitalize, more than 1 billion people speak it. So that's also a run-on fused sentence. It's not correct. John knew the answer to the last essay exam question. Here, then after question, you need to have a period. But since there's no period, this becomes a run-on sentence. So all of these colored sentences are exact sentences from your quiz. And last but not least, when do we use an apostrophe? So we use apostrophe S to show ownership. So if I say the China doll's dress was a sunny yellow, that means that the dress belongs to the China doll. And so therefore, we use an apostrophe S to show possession. Jack's hat was a bright red. So we use apostrophe S to show that Jack owns the hat. And we use apostrophe S to show that Susan owns the shoes. Susan's shoes were too small for her. So this is known as a possessive subject, in which you have the subject of the sentence showing possession. Here you have a possessive object because you have the object. So an object always comes after the verb, while a subject comes before the verb. So that's how you know that this is a possessive subject and that is a possessive object. So here's everyone's favorite part of the lecture is when we do the practice week 7 quiz. So don't take your actual week 7 quiz until you pass your practice quiz with 100%. So the new employee will take the front office wearing the brown suit. What kind of error is in this sentence? So here, in order to make this sentence correct, I have to move wearing the brown suit next to employee. So the new employee wearing the brown suit will take the front office. So if I have to move the modifier around, then that is a misplaced modifier error. I can't seem to find the keys. This is the first time you weren't late. If you aren't going to be able to make it, please call. And so which one is the correct sentence? It's C, because here you're missing an apostrophe and an apostrophe. We always use an apostrophe with contractions and not sound like a faker. Is that a complete sentence or a fragment? This is a fragment because it's missing a verb and an object. So this is a fragment. Which sentence below is correct? Obviously it's B, because at the age of 4, your father did not teach you to ride a bike. It's when you were 4. So that makes it B. When I was 4, my dad taught me to ride a bike. So this one is missing a subject. So this is a dangling modifier mistake. The most popular language in the world is Chinese. More than 1 billion people speak it. So is this a complete sentence or a run-on sentence? Obviously a run-on sentence because you need a period over here because you have a independent clause, complete thought. You need to put a period there and then you need to capitalize M. So when you have 2 sentences that run together with no period, that's a run-on sentence because one sentence runs on into the other. Which sentence is correct? Linda took her daughter to the doctor who has a high fever, or Linda took her daughter who has a high fever to the doctor. So who is having the high fever? Is it the doctor that has a high fever or the daughter that has a high fever? Would you take your daughter to a doctor that's already got a high fever? No. So that means that A is wrong. So you need to, B is correct because it's the daughter that's sick. And so you take your sick daughter to the doctor. So here, Linda took her daughter who has a high fever to the doctor. What kind of error is in my uncle just watches one television station? So I have to move just in order to make this correct. My uncle watches just one television station. So if I have to move the modifier around to make it make sense, that's known as a misplaced modifier because the modifier is not in the correct position. George knew the answer to the last essay question. He didn't have enough time to write his response. Right away, we know that this is a run-on sentence because there's no period over here between the 2 sentences. And if you don't have a period between 2 sentences, you have a run-on sentence. Walking on the sidewalk, a car raced by. What kind of error is in this sentence? And so here, you're missing the subject. Who was walking on the sidewalk when the car raced by? So it should be while I was walking on the sidewalk. So when you have a missing subject, then that is a dangling modifier. I'll say that again. When you're missing a subject, that means it's a dangling because you leave the modifier dangling. And what are you modifying? Who's walking on the sidewalk? So it just dangles. That's one way to remember it. First of all, one must be sure to speak directly to the boss. Is this a complete sentence or a fragment? So you got to take a look. Well, this sentence has a subject, a verb, and an object. It's got subject, verb, it's not missing any parts. So if the sentence is not missing any of the parts for a simple sentence, subject, verb, object, then A, it's a complete sentence. While an earthquake shook the building. And so here, is this a dangling modifier or a misplaced modifier? Here you have a dangling modifier, okay? While I was working, an earthquake shook the building. So that means that it should be while working. earthquake shook the building. And so this is so who was working? So while I was working, an earthquake shook the building. So this is a dangling modifier. If a person talks to a coworker who doesn't like him or her, is that a complete sentence or a fragment? That is a fragment because it's missing another independent clause to complete the sentence. Remember, when we have a complex sentence, we have to have a dependent clause and an independent clause in order to have one whole sentence. So this is a fragment. Not to a coworker or secretary. Is that a complete sentence or a fragment? This is a fragment because it's missing a verb and an object. The can of mushroom soup must have spoiled. It was bulging at the top. So here you're missing a period. Therefore, that makes this a run-on sentence because you have two sentences that run into each other. So what are modifiers? Modifiers should be placed as far away from the object, should be deleted from a sentence, or do modifiers offer details and descriptions about an object? So remember, modifiers are like adjectives. John has a blue shirt. Blue modifies shirt. And so the word blue is a modifier. So therefore, modifiers offer details and descriptions about the shirt, about an object, about a noun. So therefore, the answer is A. George knew the answer to the last essay question. He didn't have enough time to write his response. This is definitely a run-on sentence because George did not know the answer to the last essay exam question. You're supposed to put a period there, and then you're supposed to put he with a capital H. So this is a run-on sentence. Does the following sentence contain a misplaced modifier or a dangling modifier? I will be on the phone making appointments today. And so here you have an example of a misplaced modifier, because in order for this sentence to make sense, it should be, I will be making appointments on the phone today. Your phone is not going to grow hands and start making appointments by itself. So here this is a misplaced modifier. So misplaced modifier is when you have to move the words around in order for the sentence to make sense. I respect my parents. I resent their attempts to choose a career for me. And so here you have a run-on sentence, because here you need to have a period, and then you have, I respect my parents, that's one complete thought, and I resent their attempts to choose a career for me, that's another complete thought. So this is a run-on sentence. I could tell the room had been dusted, for all the pictures were crooked. Is this a complete sentence or a run-on sentence? And I know that after all of the run-on sentences we've had in the quiz, you're likely to think, oh my God, that's another run-on sentence. But it's not, because you've got the fanboys, okay? Remember, fanboy stands for and, nor, but, yet, or, yet, so. So when you have a coordinating conjunction between two sentences, you have to have a comma before the fanboys, before the coordinating conjunction. That makes this a correct compound sentence. So don't be fooled by all of the run-on sentences earlier on in the quiz. This particular sentence is actually a compound sentence. And in this case, the word for means because. It's a very British, I mean, in English, American English, we don't tend to use for, or I got a good grade on my test, for I studied hard. That doesn't even sound, I mean, I guess that's very Boston English, but for the rest of the country who don't speak British English or British derived English, that's very uncommon. But in this sentence, for means because. And also when you write your essay, and you don't want to keep saying because, you can use the word for. So I would say, Jack got thin because he went on a diet. So Jack got thin for he went on a diet. It has the same exact meaning. For, in that case, has the same exact meaning as because. Okay, so you can use for instead of because all the time. All right, so here are your quiz answers. And if you can score a 100% on your practice quiz, then you're ready to take the actual quiz. Now, if anybody had come with me to this lecture, we could have gone over this together. I would have gone over this one more time. I went through this very quickly since there's nobody at this particular lecture. So that allows me to go faster. But thank goodness to videos, you can always, rewatch it again, okay? You can also watch my other videos. I also posted on the homepage other videos that where there were students that did show up. So that might make it more interesting. You can watch my winter 2022, a week 6 instructor session. And in that session, okay, it's posted on your homepage. In that session, there actually were students who came to almost every session. So if you want to see interaction and you want to see student faces so that you don't keep hearing my boring voice all the time, you can watch the winter 2022 session where I actually did have students. So that's why I post different semesters of videos for you so that you have the choice of watching ahead of time. And that's why nobody comes to these, because I did so well with the resources. Nobody really needs me to do it again. But I give these live lectures so that you have the opportunity to come during these lectures while I'm talking, so that you can come in and just ask questions. You can come in and have a one-on-one Zoom. This is the only reason these days why I give these live lectures, so that you have the opportunity to have one-on-one time with me, if you're able to make it. So I am almost done with this lecture. I would say I'm halfway through it. Okay, so this would be the halfway point. At this point, most people get off and try to take their quiz, or they repeat the video in order to study for the quiz again. The rest of this lecture will talk about how to do your week 7 forum. So in your week 7 forum, you're going to be starting essay 2. And so for a second, I'm going to stop sharing. So for your essay 2, you're going to be doing the comparison contrast essay. And comparison contrast essay simply means that you're going to compare and contrast two similar things. And so your thesis statement would be something like, childhood is better than adulthood, because as a child, I had no job, I could play all day, and no adult responsibilities like paying bills. Okay, that would be a good thesis statement. Then your paragraph 2 would be, I could play all day. Paragraph 3 would be, I had no bills to pay. And paragraph 4 would be, I had no adult responsibilities. And then you write in examples, just like you did with the 5-paragraph essay structure for essay 1. And so for week 7, you're going to start over the writing process. You're going to choose a topic for your comparison contrast essay. So what two things are you going to compare and contrast? And then you're going to write an outline for that essay 2 in the week 7 forum. So that's what you're going to do for the week 7 forum. And then after this lecture, you should be all set for week 7. You should be ready to take the week 7 quiz, and as well as be prepared to take the week 7 forum. And so after this lecture, I will give you these lecture notes. I'm not sure if I did it already, but anyway, I'll give you these lecture notes so that you can read over the lecture notes at your leisure. Some people like to just study the lecture notes. Some people like to do the video. So you can study any way you want. And so I'll go back to my share screen so that you can see your comparison contrast. Let's see here. And so we're doing the writing process. So the writing process, you have 3 stages to the writing process. Pre-writing, where you choose an essay topic, and then writing is when you transform your outline into a 5-paragraph essay structure, and then you rewrite, in which you revise your essay and hand in your final draft. And so your whole writing process is pre-writing, writing, and rewriting. And so here in, let's see, so in the first half of the class, pre-writing was in week 2 assignment. Week 4 was when we did our essay rough draft. And then week 5 and 6, we did our rewriting and handed in our midterm. And I want to say that so far, everyone's doing great on the midterm. You're all doing great. You've all learned the 5 paragraphs. I've started to grade the week 6 final drafts, and you're all doing gangbusters. But you just have to remember to double space your paper. Got to remember to double space that paper. Even though in the forums, we didn't have to worry about formatting, but when you hand in assignments to me in the assignment portal, then everything has to be formatted APA. Okay, so that's the first half of the class. The second half of the class is going to be a little different. Okay, and so in week 7, you're going to do pre-writing, where you're going to choose the topic and write the outline. Week 8 is when you can write your rough draft. Then we're going to skip week 9 and 10. Forget about week 9 and 10. Totally different stuff. So week 7, week 8, and week 11 and 12. That's going to be the writing process for Essay 2. And I'll repeat that again. Week 7 will be pre-writing. Week 8 will be writing. And week 11 and 12 will be rewriting. So 7, 8, 11, 12. That's going to be Essay 2. And then 9 and 10, I will explain in a different lecture elsewhere. So just remember 7, 8, 11, 12. And then you'll be done with this class. And just about everybody has done a really good job with their week 6. That's what's so this week is week 6. All you have to do is just to hand in your week 6 assignment, which counts as your midterm. And week 12 will count as your week 12 final draft will count as your final exam. That pretty much sums up, here are the instructions for your week 6 midterm. So it says here, midterm exam. And you have to have a title page, introduction with thesis statement. You got to use Times New Roman 12. You got to have 5 paragraphs. I had a couple of students who handed me something with 4 paragraphs, which is not enough, because in the assignment, they want you to have 5 paragraphs, and then submit your assignment. And then here I went over the week 7 comparison contrast. Los Angeles is a better place to live than New York because LA has better beaches, monuments, and food. So here LA has better beaches. So here you would have LA has better beaches. So then paragraph 2 is better beaches. LA has better monuments, then you have better monuments. LA has better food, and you have better food. And that pretty much concludes your comparison, because you're comparing 2 places, and which is better than the other. And I will go over the difference between an evaluative thesis statement and a factual thesis statement in my next lecture. So just think about one thing is better than the other. So you can compare and don't just simply write childhood is, you just have to compare. What I want from you is I want your preference. I want to know your opinion. Don't just simply compare. Childhood is a time where people play all the time. And while adulthood is a time when people go to a job. Everybody knows that. What I want to know is what makes the essay interesting is what you think is better or worse. That's what gives it, because when you have a simple subject like adulthood versus childhood, you don't have to just describe what that is. Everybody's been a child, and then everybody's been an adult. So what makes the essay interesting is if you give your opinion of what you think of which one is better. That's why we call it an evaluative, because you're evaluating which one is better. Do I like childhood better, or do I like adulthood better? Do I like to drink Coca-Cola better, or do I like to drink Pepsi, for instance? Do I like one musician or the other musician? Which one is better and why? So that's what gives your essay heart, is when you tell me what you think and you tell me why you think that way. For a good thesis statement has what and why. And the what is your preference, and the why is why you think that way. So in this case, I think the what, LA is better than New York. And then the why is because LA has better beaches, monument, and food. When you put the what and why together, you have an excellent thesis statement. That's how we do a thesis statement. And here I go over the difference between an explanatory thesis statement and an evaluative thesis statement. And we use an explanatory thesis statement only if we're talking about something really complicated, like a really complicated topic nobody understands. And so at the beginning of COVID-19, most people confused the flu with COVID-19. So you could then explain such a complicated topic. Okay, well, this is what COVID-19 is, and this is what the flu is, or climate change. Climate change is like this. Whenever you want to explain something complicated, then we use an explanatory thesis statement where we simply explain to this without showing preference. We just explain to everybody what something is. Those are known as expository essays, where we simply inform the person of the facts. But what we're doing, because your topics are so simple, adulthood versus childhood, and the examples that they give in the week 7 forum are all very easy. So when you have easy, non-controversial topics, then you're going to use the evaluative thesis statement. And otherwise, if you write a very easy topic and you use the explanatory thesis statement, where you try to just tell me what something is, it's very boring, okay? Cats versus dogs. And someone will write, well, a dog barks, a dog has fur, and a dog lives in a doghouse, while a cat meows, and a cat can go into a cat litter. Okay, that's very dull to read because everybody knows that a dog barks. Everybody already knows that cats meow. And then that makes the paper, why would I want to read about something I already know? So instead, when we write about simple topics, we use the evaluative thesis statement, and we use the evaluative thesis statement, and we talk about our preferences. And it's our preferences and why we think that way that gives our essay heart. And then the reader becomes interested in wanting to know, but what do you think about it? What do you want to know about it? And then suddenly the essay comes to life because the person is nosy about what you think. Why do you think magazines like National Enquirer sells? Because people are nosy by nature. They want to stick their nose into other people's business. So that's how they sell. And that's how you can sell a simple topic, childhood versus adulthood, or whatever it is you choose. So for your second essay, you can compare anything you want. You can do a complicated essay if you want. I had a student do an essay, bacterial infection versus a viral infection. She got to use her explanatory thesis statement where you just state the facts, because you can't really say, I like bacterial infection better than viral infections. I'm like, that doesn't even make sense, right? So in some topics don't lend themselves to an evaluation anyway. So to sum up, if you're going to use a complicated topic, scientific topic, you can use an explanatory thesis statement where you simply state the facts. You would state something like a bacterial infection does not need antibiotics, while it's the other way around, sorry. Viral infections does not need antibiotics, while bacterial infections need antibiotics. So, you know that the word explanatory means you're simply explaining to the reader something complicated. Then you have to, that's why it's called an explanatory thesis statement. Then if you write an evaluative thesis statement, that's when you're evaluating two things and telling the reader which one is better than the other. So you have two kinds of thesis statements. And for this assignment, for your essay too, unless you choose something complicated, the evaluative thesis statement is the one you're going to write. So I'm going to go over in more detail about the block method of comparison contrast and alternate method of comparison contrast in my week 8 lecture, or 7-8 lecture, something like that. And anyway, so I hope to see you all next week. And this week, for the week 6, we're halfway through the class. And so for week 6, all you have to do is just write your midterm. And then you're done halfway through the class. And so I want to congratulate everybody for making it halfway through the spring 2022 semester. And we have just 6 more weeks to go. And then you graduate from this class. and you're that much closer to graduation. So if you have any questions, you can always email me. So this ends this week, week 6 instructor session. So I'll see you all next week.